Welcome back to IdeaSexx, the channel where we bone with our brains. Not actually. This is a space where we attempt to make some sense of the human experience through the intercourse of ideas. I did not coin the term IdeaSexx. It's a real thing, according to Urban Dictionary. Today we're going to be talking about what's on everyone's minds and soon to be in everyone's lungs. I know people hate the coronavirus jokes, but humor is how I cope with the weight of existence, so please forgive. If I had to describe 2020, it would be like a bad action movie. First, everything is on fire, then there's a helicopter crash in which one of the most legendary human beings of all time dies. We have a pandemic on our hands that either came from the bat caves of Wuhan or is a stolen bioweapon. And now we have a plague, that's what it's called, of locusts swarming and may starve millions of people, and we're careening toward what may be the second Great Depression. I did not sign up for this. Help! But I see a light, so if you're looking around like I don't understand this cruel garbage world, I want no part of it, and you're eyeing the coronavirus like, take me, man-meat! Then give me 15 minutes to pep talk you, because my singular goal with this video is for at least one person to walk away feeling hopeful. I was casually conversing with a crazy lady on the street the other day, and I said something to the effect of, we live in interesting times, and she came back with this super deadpan expression, and she was like, we live in biblical times. And I was like, oh shit! And shortly after, get this, I get a call from a friend, and she tells me the angel of Moroni dropped his horn, and I'm like, the angel of who dropped his what? Apparently, the angel of Moroni is a figure in Mormon culture that they put at the top of their temples, and he's supposed to usher in the second coming of Christ. So when Salt Lake City had their big earthquake, he dropped his horn, and they haven't been able to find it.
End is nigh.
You know, I'm not religious. I'm not particularly superstitious, but I do feel like we're on the brink of something big. Spiritual, mystical, religious stuff aside, I feel like the rate at which technology is advancing, it's exponential. The extreme societal and cultural changes we've seen in the last 50 years alone, we're gonna see some really historical things in this lifetime, and I think COVID-19 is one of them. It's an amazing virus for a few reasons. Probably came from bats, possibly pangolins. Pangolin? Is that how you say that? The thing that looks like a Sandlash Pokemon.
It's true!
And in any case, it's not unusual for a virus to hop between species. Bats also gave us Ebola, HIV, chimps, bubonic plague, rat fleas, clap, yeah mama. Oh, by the way, these diseases that jump between species are called zoonotic diseases. I learned a word of the day. And it's actually kind of amazing that the virus has made the jumps that it has, which leads me to the second amazing thing about it, which is how effectively it spreads. And this is true for most members, all members of the coronavirus family. The secret sauce to their success, it lies within their structure. So many S's. Corona means crown or wreath in Latin. And if you look at these little fuckers under a microscope, they're like balls with spikes. And these spikes really like a protein found on human skin called ACE2. They're very sticky with it. So you could imagine them as being like, they're like these little viral morning stars that they see ya, and they like ya, and they grab onto you. And so far it doesn't seem like the virologists know a whole lot about their biology, but what they do know is that they're so effective at busting through our cells because of their general makeup, that spiky stickiness. That's how they described it in the scientific literature. That leads me to what I think is most amazing about the virus, which is it goes to show how interconnected we all are. And I don't just mean human to human. I mean human to the entire ecosystem of our planet. To think that the virus that may be contracted by 80% of the human population came from a bat sold at a wet market in China is mind-boggling, and to think that we humans are responsible. So there was an article published in CNN that featured a man named Andrew Cunningham. He is the professor of wildlife epidemiology at the Zoological Society of London. I will link that below. And the gist is we're seeing more and more zoonotic spillover because of human activity. So by hunting bats and encroaching on their territory, we've essentially stressed them the fuck out. And just like when you stress a human out, the immune system goes down. And so more sick bats more sick animals in general means we have a greater chance of zoonotic spillover, which is probably why we've seen so much of it in the past 10-20 years. Quote from the article, "The ultimate lesson is that damage to the planet can also damage people more quickly and severely than the generational gradual shifts of climate change. It's not okay to transform a forest into agriculture without understanding the impact that has on climate, carbon storage, disease emergence, and flood risk," said Jones. "You can't do those things in isolation without thinking about what it does to humans." And that last sentence really caught my eye, particularly his use of the word isolation, because we humans are Earth's apex predators, and we tend to think of ourselves for that reason as being separate from or even above the natural world, especially in the West, where we think of ourselves as separate from everything. We're like these Ayn Rand-loving, rugged individualists who pride ourselves on total self-reliance and like, fuck it all, go it alone, and I'm independent from everything on the outside, which does wonders to isolate ourselves. IdeaSexx for another time, but we can never truly separate ourselves from what is outside, because we are an integral part of it, and it is an integral part of us. And that's the idea of karma, right? That what we do to another, we do to ourselves. It's the idea that in voodoo, that when you curse someone, it's one finger forward and it's 3 fingers back. So you could think of COVID as being the karmic boomerang to the face. This idea of interconnectedness is in a lot of places, this idea of doing unto others. And if you watch the first episode, you know that a driving point behind this channel is that where ideas overlap, there tends to be a grain of truth. And so to this point of interconnectedness, we could look at the structure of our own cosmos. If you juxtapose an image of the human brain, our neural networks, with the pathways of our galaxy, they look the same. We could bring it down closer to Earth in physics, the butterfly effect, which people describe as being like a butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil and it sets off a tornado in Texas, which isn't exactly right. It gets the general idea across, but it's also called the sensitive dependence on initial conditions. And it's the idea that small changes can have a massive impact on a bigger system. We could take it down to an even more micro level, to the level of the individual. People who have had transcendent experiences universally report experiencing unity, whether that is through prayer or meditation or drugs, but they all purport this same experience. And if that's a little woo-woo for you, we could look at peak states. Abraham Maslow documented what he called peak states, and a lot of modern thinkers have picked that up and run with it. Flow states, they're basically the same things, but we typically hear about this in world-class athletes. This is those peak moments where, like, Michael Jordan scores 6 3-pointers in less than 20 minutes. And then afterwards he's like, yeah, man, I was just in the zone. It is the musician who has that mystical experience of becoming his music. In an absolute peak state, you lose your sense of self and become aware of the unity in all things. This is, if you had this experience, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, it's really well documented, so I'm not just making shit up. So these are just a few, we'll call them proofs of interconnectedness. But before we go any further, I would love to hear an example that you might have. So if you do have an example, drop me that idea, quote, study, concept, whatever it is, in the comments. We'll have some IdeaSexx. Or you could make a point against this interconnectedness, because that's also very interesting. But I really do believe in that interconnectedness. I think it's one of those fundamental truths, and like most of those truths, it's really well expressed in scripture. So to that point, there is a Hermetic axiom that I love. As above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul. It is echoed in Gnosticism, right? The idea of Christ within. It's echoed in the Hindu Upanishads. As large as the universe outside, even so large is the universe within the lotus of the heart. Within it are heaven and earth, the sun, the moon, the lightning, and all the stars. What is in the macrocosm is in this microcosm. Point being, whether you look at this through the lens of psychology or science or mysticism, it really does seem to be the case that we are like this. We are an interconnected system. And what's cool about being human is we have a lot of agency or sway over this system. So Yuval Harari talks about that in Sapiens from the perspective of an anthropologist / scientist. Jordan Peterson, the renowned clinical psychologist, talks about this quite a bit. He has a line that I really like. I'm not going to be able to quote it exactly, but he says something to the effect of, what makes human beings human is that we are the only beings who voluntarily confront chaos and in the face of it transform, which if our system isn't chaotic right now, I don't know what is. That brings us back to the apocalypse. It always comes full circle. So here we are, stuck in this chaotic system, riddled with disease and locusts, and potentially facing the second coming, which is Christ coming back to earth, and everyone who chose to believe in him and love him will go to heaven, and the rest of us will burn in eternal hellfire, which, if I were the kind of person to get offended, I might be, but I feel like when you interpret the Bible metaphorically, it has a lot of profound insight into the human condition. So here's the idea I'm playing with. We are coming to a kind of judgment day, but I don't think it's something that's going to take place in the afterlife. I think it's something that's going to take place in the present life, because it really does feel like we're reaching an inflection point in this lifetime. Like, shit just keeps getting crazier, and it's going to tip one of two ways, and this is the judgment. Either we're going to tip over into an apocalyptic world, a kind of hell on earth, right? And this is everything we've been scared of. This is what has been in Hollywood movies and in young adult novels. It's in our cultural mythos, as Joseph Campbell would say, because it is something we know is a possibility for our future, and it's terrifying. The alternative is the opposite. It's a kind of heavenly kingdom, a peace or a paradise on earth. And the good news is, if humans are this planet's only moral agents, we are caretakers of the earth, we are beings made in the image of the divine, I think we have collective influence over this future. So what can we do? We've played with some kind of lofty ideas. We've waxed very philosophical. Let's bring it back down to the actionable micro level. So this idea of bringing about a paradise on earth is not a new thing. Again, it's one of those ideas that's in a lot of places. And I'm going to give 3 examples that I think speak really well to it. And it's interesting because they all have the same solution. So the first is tikkun olam, and that is the Jewish idea of repairing the earth. And it's done through small acts of goodness that help us restore the world closer to its original harmonious state, the Garden of Eden. And for Jews, that has a very sacred meaning, right? Because they've been persecuted for centuries, for millennia. But I think that that idea is universal. It applies to all of us, that if we behave constructively and beneficially, everyone benefits. 2, the New Age community. I never know what to call them because they're not an organized religion and they don't really seem to like labels, but I talk about them a lot and need a word to refer to that group, that subset of humans. So the New Age community, for lack of a better term, has an idea very similar to this, and it's, when I hear them talk about it, it's very literal. So it's the idea that by healing ourselves, we literally heal the planet. So you send out a certain kind of energy, you vibrate at a certain frequency, and when you take the time to raise that frequency, to do the healing and the inner work, you raise the collective consciousness of our planet. You raise our global consciousness. Last but not least, let's look at this from a non-spiritual, non-religious perspective. This is Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life. I haven't finished it yet because it's a thick mama, but I think it's interesting to look at this concept from the lens of a clinical psychologist. So I'm going to read you an excerpt. How could the world be freed from the terrible dilemma of conflict on the one hand and psychological and social dissolution on the other? The answer was this: through the elevation and development of the individual, and through the willingness of everyone to shoulder the burden of being and to take the heroic path. We must each adopt as much responsibility as possible for individual life, society, and the world. We must each tell the truth and repair what is in disrepair and break down and recreate what is old and outdated. It is in this manner that we can and must reduce the suffering that poisons the world. It's asking a lot. It's asking for everything. But the alternative, the horror of authoritarian belief, the chaos of the collapsed state, the tragic catastrophe of the unbridled natural world, the existential angst and weakness of the purposeless individual is clearly worse. Perhaps we could come to avoid the pathways to hell, and we have seen in the terrible 20th century just how real hell can be. I hope that these rules and their accompanying essays will help people understand what they already know, that the soul of the individual eternally hungers for the heroism of genuine being, and that the willingness to take on that responsibility is identical to the decision to live a meaningful life. If we each live properly, we will collectively flourish. And I think what's really interesting about this is he sounds a lot like Campbell, first video when we talked about the hero's journey. He says that it's about shouldering the burden of being and taking the heroic path. And then he ends with, the soul of the individual eternally hungers for the heroism of genuine being. So, more IdeaSexx, it's everywhere. What really strikes me is that these are very different groups / people, and they all seem to agree on the tactic, which is that it starts at the level of the individual. So what I'm taking away from these ideas is that it is the priority of our respective lifetimes to make our personal growth a priority. When we become all we can be, we are of highest service to each other. And that is why I am choosing to view COVID-19 and all 2020's bullshit as an opportunity. It is a reminder, first of all, that we are all like this, and it's an invitation to recalibrate, to turn inward and ask, what can I be doing better for myself, for the people around me? And it's the perfect time to ask that question, because most of us are stuck in our houses, Netflix and quarantining, and it is a great time to reflect and recalibrate and start to make the small changes that will allow us to arrive at a better, higher place once we've made it through to the other side of this storm. Maybe that is meditating daily. Maybe you're stuck, you're trapped in your house for the first time with your spouse and your kids and you can't get away and they're driving you crazy and you realize there's some work to do. Maybe you lost your job and you can make that career change that you always wanted to but were afraid to, and now you've got nothing to lose. Maybe you were so overwhelmed that you were finally going to go see that therapist or do whatever it is that you need to do to heal. And if you don't buy into the whole heal yourself and you heal the world, one day we're all going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya thing, I get it. I respect it. And the idea still stands, because in these circumstances, the only thing we can control is ourselves, our thoughts and our actions. And so yes, it's easy for anyone to turn on the news right now, to look at the big picture and start to spiral, but it doesn't serve us. We tend to know what serves us. We almost always know what we need to do in order to make a better life for ourselves, in order to unfold in a way that serves our highest good. And yeah, things are ugly right now, but this, to reference video 1, this is the monolith. This is the belly of the whale. This is descending into the valley of darkness and coming back with the sun. This is death to the old ways and resurrection, and you get to decide how you come up out of it, because it starts with you. It starts with me. It starts with us, and I don't think there is a better opportunity than the present moment, because it's all we have. If you made it this far, you are probably a kindred spirit. So if you're tribe, please subscribe, throw me one of these, always down for some IdeaSexx in the comments. It's quite a bit longer than we usually go. Next time, the video will definitely be shorter and probably lighter, as light as you can be while still making sense of the human experience. But until then, stay safe, stay blessed, and stay tuned.